Have you ever felt like you were on the verge of a breakthrough, a new level in your faith, your career, your relationships, or your purpose, only to feel stuck as if an invisible force is holding you back? You pray, you work hard, you believe God's promises, but somehow you just can't seem to step into that next season of victory. What if I told you that the biggest obstacle standing in your way isn't external? What if the thing blocking your breakthrough is you, or more specifically, your mindset? Let me take you back to a story in the Bible that might just change the way you see your challenges. It's found in Numbers 13, and it's one of the most dramatic moments in Israel's journey to the Promised Land. The Israelites are standing at the edge of their destiny. After centuries of slavery, miraculous deliverance, and God's supernatural provision, they're finally about to step into the land flowing with milk and honey. But something goes terribly wrong. Instead of claiming their inheritance, they shrink back in fear. And it all comes down to one word: grasshoppers. Yes, grasshoppers. In Numbers 13, verse 33, the spies who scouted the Promised Land reported, "We saw the Nephilim there. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them." This single sentence reveals a mindset that not only doomed an entire generation to wander in the wilderness, but also holds a powerful lesson for us today. It's what I call the grasshopper mentality, a way of thinking that magnifies your obstacles and minimizes your God. And if you're not careful, it can block your breakthrough just as it blocked theirs. So let's dive deep into this story, unpack the grasshopper mentality, and discover how to overcome it so you can step into the breakthrough God has for you. Before we proceed, I invite you to watch a short presentation that reveals how to unlock God's miracles and step into your divine calling. You'll find a link to the life-changing presentation in the description below. Be sure to watch it after this one. That's my special gift to you for coming across this video. Moving on. To fully understand the grasshopper mentality, we need to rewind a bit and look at the context of Numbers 13. The Israelites had just experienced one of the most spectacular displays of God's power in human history. He had delivered them from Egypt with a mighty hand, parted the Red Sea, and provided for them in the wilderness. Now they were camped at Kadesh Barnea, on the border of the Promised Land. This was it, the moment they had been waiting for. God had already promised them the land, and all they had to do was trust Him and take possession of it. But instead of moving forward in faith, Moses sent 12 spies to scout the land. 10 of them came back with a report that was equal parts fact and fear. They admitted that the land was indeed flowing with milk and honey, just as God had said. They even brought back a cluster of grapes so large it had to be carried on a pole between two men, according to Numbers 13, verse 23. But then they dropped the bombshell. The people who live there are powerful, and the cities are fortified and very large. We can't attack those people. They are stronger than we are. Numbers 13, verses 28 and 31. And then in verse 33, they said the words that revealed their true problem. "We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them." Do you see what happened here? The spies didn't just describe the obstacles, they internalized them. They didn't just see giants, they saw themselves as grasshoppers. And that's where everything fell apart. So, what is the grasshopper mentality? The grasshopper mentality is a mindset that distorts your perception of yourself, your God, and your circumstances. It's when you see your challenges as insurmountable and yourself as insignificant. It's when you compare your weakness to the enemy's strength and conclude that you don't stand a chance. It's when you forget who God is and what He has already done for you. Let's break it down. 1. It magnifies the obstacles. The spies saw the giants, the fortified cities, and the powerful armies, and they allowed these things to dominate their perspective. They didn't just acknowledge the challenges, they let them define the narrative. 2. It minimizes God. In focusing on the obstacles, they lost sight of the miracles God had already performed on their behalf. They forgot that the same God who parted the Red Sea and brought down Pharaoh's army was still with them. 3. It distorts your identity. The most damaging part of the grasshopper mentality is how it affects your self-perception. The spies didn't just say, "The giants are big." They said, "We are small." They saw themselves as grasshoppers, weak, insignificant, and powerless. This mentality is dangerous because it doesn't just affect how you see your circumstances, it affects how you respond to them. The Israelites didn't just feel like grasshoppers, they acted like grasshoppers. They complained, rebelled, and ultimately refused to enter the promised land. And because of their unbelief, they wandered in the wilderness for 40 years until that entire generation died off. Now, let's bring this into your life. How is the grasshopper mentality blocking your breakthrough? Here are 3 ways it might be holding you back. 1. It keeps you stuck in fear. Fear is the natural byproduct of the grasshopper mentality. When you see yourself as small and your challenges as big, fear takes over. It paralyzes you, keeping you from taking the steps of faith that lead to breakthrough. 2. It robs you of confidence. The Israelites didn't just lack faith in God, they lacked confidence in themselves. They didn't believe they could overcome the giants, even with God on their side. When you see yourself as a grasshopper, you lose the confidence to pursue your God-given dreams. 3. It distracts you from God's promises. The spies' report focused entirely on the obstacles and completely ignored God's promises. They forgot that He had already guaranteed their victory. When you adopt the grasshopper mentality, you do the same thing. You focus on the problems instead of the promises. So, how do you break free from the grasshopper mentality and step into your breakthrough? Let's look at the example of Joshua and Caleb, the 2 spies who brought back a different report. While the other 10 spies saw giants, Joshua and Caleb saw opportunity. While the others saw themselves as grasshoppers, Joshua and Caleb saw themselves as conquerors. Here's what we can learn from them. 1. Focus on God's promises, not your problems. Joshua and Caleb didn't ignore the challenges. They just didn't let them define the narrative. They said, "The land we passed through and explored is exceedingly good. If the Lord is pleased with us, He will lead us into that land." Numbers 14, verses 7 to 8. They kept their eyes on God's promises, not the obstacles. 2. See yourself through God's eyes. The 10 spies saw themselves as grasshoppers, but Joshua and Caleb saw themselves as God saw them, chosen, empowered, and destined for victory. When you see yourself through God's eyes, you realize that you're not a grasshopper, you're a giant slayer. 3. Take steps of faith. Overcoming the grasshopper mentality requires action. You can't just change your mindset, you have to act on it. Joshua and Caleb were ready to march into the promised land, even when everyone else was too afraid to move. Breakthrough happens when you take steps of faith, even when it's scary. The grasshopper mentality is more than just a mindset. It's a spiritual stronghold. It's a lens that distorts your vision, a voice that whispers lies, and a chain that keeps you bound to fear and doubt. But here's the truth. You don't have to stay trapped in that mentality. You don't have to see yourself as small, insignificant, or powerless. You don't have to let your giants define your destiny. Because the same God who brought the Israelites out of Egypt is with you today, and He's calling you to step into your breakthrough. Let me ask you something. What's your promised land? What's the dream, the vision, the calling that God has placed on your heart? Maybe it's starting a ministry, writing a book, launching a business, or healing a broken relationship. Maybe it's overcoming an addiction, stepping into a leadership role, or simply living a life of deeper faith and obedience. Whatever it is, I can guarantee you this: there are giants in the land. There will always be obstacles, challenges, and fears that try to convince you to turn back. But here's the difference between those who wander in the wilderness and those who step into their destiny: perspective. Joshua and Caleb saw the same giants as the other spies, but they saw something else too. They saw God. They saw His promises. They saw His power. And because of that, they saw themselves not as grasshoppers, but as conquerors. They didn't deny the reality of the challenges. They just refused to let those challenges have the final say. They knew that if God was for them, it didn't matter who or what was against them. And the same is true for you. So, how do you step into your breakthrough? It starts with a decision to reject the grasshopper mentality and embrace the truth of who God says you are. It starts with a shift in perspective. Instead of focusing on the size of your giants, focus on the size of your God. Instead of magnifying your weaknesses, magnify His strength. Instead of seeing yourself as a grasshopper, see yourself as a child of the King, armed with His promises and empowered by His Spirit. But here's the thing. Breakthrough doesn't happen in the comfort zone. It doesn't happen when you're standing on the sidelines, waiting for the perfect moment or the perfect conditions. Breakthrough happens when you take steps of faith, even when it's scary. It happens when you choose to trust God more than you fear the giants. It happens when you say, Lord, I don't know how this is going to work out, but I know you're with me, and that's enough. Think about it. If the Israelites had trusted God and moved forward, they could have entered the promised land in a matter of days. But because they let fear and doubt take over, they spent 40 years wandering in circles. Don't let that be your story. Don't let the grasshopper mentality rob you of the life God has called you to live. Don't let it keep you stuck in the wilderness when your promised land is right in front of you. Here's the good news. It's never too late to change your mindset. It's never too late to start seeing yourself through God's eyes. It's never too late to take that first step of faith. Maybe you've been living with the grasshopper mentality for years and it feels like it's too deeply ingrained to overcome. But remember this, God specializes in turning weaknesses into strengths, fear into faith, and grasshoppers into giant slayers. All he's asking is for you to trust him. So, what's your next step? What's the one thing God is calling you to do that feels impossible right now? Maybe it's forgiving someone who hurt you, or maybe it's stepping into a role that feels way over your head. Maybe it's finally letting go of that sin you've been holding on to. Or maybe it's simply choosing to believe that God's promises are true, even when everything around you says otherwise. Whatever it is, take that step. Don't wait for the fear to go away. Do it afraid, because that's where breakthrough happens. And as you take that step, remember this, you're not alone. God is with you every step of the way. He's fighting for you, working behind the scenes and preparing the way before you. The giants may be big, but your God is bigger. The obstacles may seem insurmountable, but nothing is impossible with him. So lift your eyes, strengthen your heart, and step into your breakthrough. Your promised land is waiting. If you found this video valuable, your support through sharing, liking, commenting, and subscribing to the channel would be priceless. See you in the next one.